Right now on Ana Cabrera reports, primary season slugfest. A Republican senator and target of the president defeated in Louisiana, while another Trump critic faces a bruising primary in Kentucky. What it all says about Trump's hold on his party and implications for November. Plus, the prison guard who was on duty when Jeffrey Epstein died in his cell is on Capitol Hill, set to testify behind closed doors today. And President Trump expected to meet with his national security team in the Situation Room tomorrow. What options could be in the mix for Iran? Good Monday morning. It's 10 Eastern, 7 a.m. Pacific. I'm Ana Cabrera reporting from New York. President Trump's primary revenge tour has picked off another Republican Trump critic, and there could be more to come. Senator Bill Cassidy of Louisiana is just the latest Republican to be out of a job after crossing President Trump. Cassidy was seeking his third term, but this was his first campaign since voting to convict Trump in his impeachment trial over the January 6th Capitol attack in 2021. He finished 1962. Tomorrow, all eyes are on seven-term GOP Congressman Thomas Massie, who's hoping to avoid a similar fate after President Trump urged Republicans in Kentucky to, quote, vote the bum out. We have MSNOW reporters on the ground for these primary battles with Michael Schnell in Kentucky, Nnamdi Agwonwu in Marietta, Georgia. Also with us, former communications director for Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, Michael Hardaway, and former GOP communications director Tara Setmer. Michael Schnell, let's start with you there in Kentucky, where Congressman Massie is in the fight of his political life. Why is President Trump so angry with Massie?
Yeah, Ana, as you mentioned, President Trump and Thomas Massie have sort of been at odds for years, but that tension is set to come to a head tomorrow when voters here in Kentucky's 4th congressional district head to the polls and choose between Massie, who is this 14-year incumbent, somebody who is willing to break from President Trump, and Ed Gallrein. He is Trump's hand-picked candidate to challenge Thomas Massie. He's a Navy SEAL and he's a farmer. Now, this break, as I mentioned, between Massie and Trump has been percolating for years, but the moment that President Trump actually urged Gallrein to get into the race was as Thomas Massie was spearheading that discharge petition to force the release of the Epstein files. You'll remember it was something that President Trump had really pushed against. He did not want those files to be out in the open. Thomas Massie filed the discharge petition. He recruited 3 other Republicans to join him. Ultimately, that effort was successful, and that's why we have seen hundreds upon thousands of documents be released. It's not just Epstein, though. Thomas Massie has also infuriated President Trump because he voted against his reconciliation package last year. And Thomas Massie has been the top GOP critic of President Trump's war in Iran. So as I mentioned, this is all set to come to a head tomorrow. When voters go to the polls. President Trump has the wind behind his back right now, having just defeated Bill Cassidy in Louisiana, having ousted 5 state senators in Indiana. Despite those circumstances, Thomas Massie still says he is in it. Take a listen to what he said yesterday.
I have the endorsement of the Right to Life organizations, the gun organizations. I had 4 members of Congress come here yesterday and campaign with me. So my situation is a little bit different. Plus, I've had millions of dollars come in from the grassroots, tens of thousands of donors to my website, thomasmassie.com, and it's still coming in, and that's how we're going to beat them.
Now, Ana, Thomas Massie may have had those Republican Congress members campaign with him over the weekend. Gallrein also bringing in some big faces this afternoon. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth is scheduled to appear with Gallrein. Noted it's coming amid this war in Iran that's still going on throughout the country. But Pete Hegseth will be here in that hotel just behind me with Gallrein as voters get ready to head to the polls tomorrow.
All right, Michael Schnell with the latest from Kentucky. Thanks for setting the scene there. Tara, after what happened with Senator Cassidy this weekend in Louisiana, should Massie be worried?
Well, of course. And the amount of money, the inordinate amount of outside money that has been thrown at him in a primary is something to behold. I mean, this is the lengths that Trump and MAGA will go to oust a congressman who, for the most part, has been with Donald Trump 95, 98% of the time. But his cardinal sin here was standing up for the survivors of Jeffrey Epstein and demanding accountability. That should sink in for people. This was a major campaign promise for Donald Trump. And yet Thomas Massie is being punished for that. I think that says a lot about where the Republican Party is today. Leader, this is what will happen to you. He was doing the right thing. Now, I'm no fan of Thomas Massie on a lot of things, but I give him credit for standing up for the Epstein survivors and taking a bipartisan approach to this and getting those files released as much as we've had so far. But if this is what Republicans and MAGA will do to one of their own, I want to caution Democrats about what to be prepared for coming in November. They will have an onslaught of money, commitment, and dirty tricks. And this is exactly what's going on here for Thomas Massie in Kentucky and what we will be facing in November. So this is a warning shot all the way around.
Michael, there's also a Senate race in Kentucky to replace Mitch McConnell. And McConnell, I think, will go down as probably the most effective or one of the most effective Senate majority leaders ever. Democrats, of course, have reason to welcome his exit, but President Trump also wanted this day to come. If Trump is convinced the GOP that they don't need more Mitch McConnells, is he doing Democrats a favor?
He is, because the Republican agenda over the past several decades could not have moved forward in the way that it had without Mitch McConnell. He was incredibly effective as an opposition leader to Democrats. And so it is foolhardy for Donald Trump or any Republicans to think that a MAGA-aligned person is more effective than someone like Mitch McConnell, who actually understands how the United States Senate works. I've worked in the Senate, and it's a very complicated place in terms of the procedures and the history. It pays well for Republicans to have someone in that seat who has been there for a while and knows how things operate.
Let's go to Georgia now, because Nnamdi, there's a Republican primary to eventually face off against Democratic Senator Jon Ossoff, and there's also an open governor's race there. Set the stakes for us.
Right, and Ossoff, likely one of the more vulnerable Democrats, being the lone Democratic. Right, and Ossoff, likely one of the more vulnerable Democrats, being the lone Democratic incumbent running for re-election in a state that Donald Trump won. But he's also one of the most well-funded. He's amassed more than $80 million so far in this campaign, and that does make Republicans a bit nervous. The Republican Senate candidates here in this state have been caught in a messy primary fight. In just a couple of moments, we're going to hear from incumbent Governor Brian Kemp. He's been campaigning with Derek Dooley. He's a former college football coach that has framed himself as the outsider in this race. He's running against two members of Congress, in Mike Collins and Buddy Carter. President Trump so far has declined to endorse in this race, which has kept things pretty open. I want to play for you why one of the candidates in this race, Earl Carter, thinks that is happening, why Trump is declining to weigh in. Take a listen.
Obviously, you'd want to have President Trump's endorsement in a primary. In a primary, there's no question about that. And I would welcome his endorsement, and I've tried to get his endorsement. Unfortunately, we've got two members of Congress right now and a slim majority in Congress, so I suspect that he's going to sit this one out.
Nana, on the governor's side, President Trump has weighed in. He's endorsed Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones. That is someone who served as an alternate elector for Trump back in 2020 and who has so far been able to hold off a challenge from Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, who, if you recall, was heard on that phone call in 2020, rebuffing efforts by Donald Trump to win just enough votes in order to overtake Joe Biden's lead. Burt Jones, currently the favorite here. On the Democratic side, former Atlantic Mayor Keisha Lance Bottom is the favorite, benefiting from high name recognition in this race, Anna.
Right, Nnamdi Egwanwu, live for us in Georgia. Thank you. Michael, Republicans see Ossoff as a prime pickup opportunity. Who or what concerns Democrats the most in this race?
I think that, as we look at this race, it's very interesting because Ossoff has done a good job in terms of driving the economic message and speaking to the fact that candidates, I think many of them are good ones in terms of from the Republican perspective, but at the end of the day, they're all Trump-aligned candidates for the most part. And so I think it doesn't really matter from an Ossoff perspective. I think his strategy here has to be to drive the economic message and the idea that Donald Trump has kind of made a mess of the economy. You've got his trade war that has essentially been a tax on the American people and costs each household more than $1,700. And so for Ossoff, his strategy has to be to focus on that more than any one Republican candidate in particular.
The other piece about Georgia here, Tara, is that here we are 5+ years after Trump's infamous Find Me the Votes call in this state. And in election, he lost to Joe Biden, and huge losses for his Senate picks in Georgia that year. Where does his influence stand with Georgia Republicans now? Do they see Trump as a liability?
Well, I think that they wish they were rid of him. You know, I mean, Georgia was ground zero for the 2020 election, as we all know. And you look at what Brad Raffensperger or Jeff Duncan, some of these folks, they've tried to distance themselves from Donald Trump. And the fact that Ossoff is doing so well and has raised so much money, I think is a good sign for Democrats there. And Republicans are nervous. What happens when Democratic voters are mobilized? And then you also have a lot of those swing voters in the Fulton County, DeKalb County areas, the larger, the city areas of Atlanta that are unhappy with what Donald Trump has done. We've seen polling that shows that swing voters have a lot of buyer's remorse. And so even Brad Kemp has admitted that he's nervous about the amount of enthusiasm on the Democratic side. I mean, there's a record number of early votes. I believe it's 1 million early voters in Georgia already, up from 2022. There's been a 30-point swing up from 2022. There's been a 30-point swing in early voting and enthusiasm from Republicans to Democrats from the last midterm. So Georgia is a very interesting place. It can be a bit of a bellwether, I think, for what we may see in the midterms, but it's also a good sign of what happens when Democrats are organized, well-financed, and committed.
We will see how these primaries shake out tomorrow. Tara Setmayer, Michael Hardaway, thank you both for your analysis. Up next, House oversight investigators set to interview the prison guard on duty when Jeffrey Epstein died. What questions are bubbling to the surface? Plus, President Trump says the clock is ticking for Iran to make a deal or else. What is or else? And the president's economic stress test. We'll dig into that new polling on the economy as gas prices break budgets. We're back in just 90 seconds. Stay with us. Right now on Capitol Hill, the last person believed to have seen convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein alive is set to face questions behind closed doors today with the House Oversight Committee. Tova Noel was one of 2 corrections officers assigned to monitor Epstein the night he died by suicide inside New York's Metropolitan Correctional Center in 2019. Since then, her internet searches, financial records, and admission to falsifying records have fueled conspiracy theories about what happened that night. Let's bring in MS NOW senior legal reporter Lisa Rubin and attorney Eric Fudalia, who represents several Epstein survivors. Lisa, how does Noel's testimony fit into the bigger puzzle here, and what do we expect lawmakers to ask her?
So most of this investigation is focused on what Jeffrey Epstein did during his life, who he associated with, how he abused women. Tova Noel is a witness that really has relevance only with respect to how Epstein lived his final days and, most importantly, how he died. The committee is also looking into the question of, did Epstein die by suicide, a question that has been revived really in recent days with the discovery of that unsealed purported suicide note. One of the things that I think prosecutors are going to be focused on today is all of the things that went wrong the night before and the day that Jeffrey Epstein died, and whether or not those things are coincidences or whether they are suggestive of some sort of wrongdoing on behalf of correctional staff. The Department of Justice's Inspector General wrote a lengthy report about those things, concluding that while there were a bunch of what they would call misconduct, it didn't rise to the level of criminality, that people should be fired, that procedures should be revised, but never found that anyone at the Department of Corrections was actually involved in Epstein's death.
Eric, how do you and your clients see this? Just how important is this interview?
It's really important, Anna. I don't think it can be overstated what Jeffrey Epstein being able to kill himself took from the survivors. They really, really wanted their day in court. They wanted the opportunity to testify in front of him, to confront him, to look into his face, look into his eyes, and tell them how he devastated their lives. They really wanted that opportunity. They really wanted the opportunity for true justice, for true accountability, and that was taken from them when whatever happened in that prison cell happened. So I think this is of paramount importance. I think this person needs to be very thoroughly investigated and questioned, and I think the public, and most importantly, the survivors, deserve answers as to what happened in that prison cell.
We talked about the conspiracy theories that have come about after the death of Jeffrey Epstein. And I'm wondering, Lisa, could Noel provide clarity or fill in the gaps of that missing minute on the security footage?
I think she can provide some clarity as to what she herself may have been doing, but she's certainly not an IT specialist or anybody who understands video technology at the level that she could provide that clarity. And of course, Anna, she's already testified as part of that OIG investigation at the Department of Justice that I was referring to. There is a transcript of her testimony that one of your producers found in the Epstein files. It's 400+ pages long, and anyone can see it to see how she has explained where she was that night, why she didn't check on Jeffrey Epstein and the specialized housing unit where he was then living without a roommate, which was itself counter to regulations and policies in the Bureau of Prison. I just want to go back to something Eric said that I think was so important. When Jeffrey Epstein passed away, whether he killed himself or didn't kill himself, he deprived his victims. Whether he killed himself or didn't kill himself, he deprived his victims, as Eric noted, of an opportunity to be heard. The judge overseeing his indictment then held a hearing on August 27, 2019, at which victims and their lawyers were invited to say whatever they wanted to say about how that event impacted them. If there's one document that our viewers would read about sort of the overall impact of Jeffrey Epstein's abuse on his survivors, I recommend that transcript to them. It's publicly available now in the Jeffrey Epstein files. Again, August 27, 2019, an extraordinarily powerful transcript about the impact of Epstein's abuse on his survivors.
And when we talk about this particular witness that will be testifying before the Oversight Committee today, Eric, it was Noel and another security guard that were both charged with falsifying records because of their lack of checking in on Epstein that night. Initially, they said they did. Turned out they didn't. They agreed to a plea deal. Does that impact this witness's credibility? Like, how might that change the approach for lawmakers?
It certainly impacts, the credibility that there's been some admission of falsifying records. As a trial attorney, if I had that sort of evidence against a witness, it would be a gold. That's a gold mine. That is really something. So in this context, absolutely, it should question her credibility. Something shady happened. Something weird happened there. No one is supposed to be able to, especially the most prolific predator of our time, is not supposed to be able to take their own life while in federal custody. It's just not supposed to happen. There are safeguards for that. Something very strange happened at that time. There's missing footage. There's falsifying records. It is so important to find out exactly what happened there, who's at fault, and how this travesty of injustice happened.
Now, that other security guard that I mentioned has not been subpoenaed to testify. Why is that?
I think a lot of it has to do with what both of them were doing there that night. First of all, Tova Noel had been working in the facility since 4 p.m. the evening before Jeffrey Epstein was found dead. She was supposed to be the last person to see him alive. She worked until 12 a.m. He was, with Noel, one of the two people who discovered Epstein dead. But his interactions with Epstein were not nearly as significant as Noel's were, because she had been working on that specialized housing unit for weeks. In fact, there is a note that was found in Jeffrey Epstein's cell after his death. We don't know whether he wrote it or not. I want to be very clear about that. But it references the fact that Tova Noel had brought Jeffrey Epstein stale food, according to the note. That indicates to me these are people who had multiple interactions with each other over a series of weeks while Epstein was in custody. The same cannot be true for Michael Thomas.
And we are also learning more about a top Goldman Sachs lawyer, Catherine Rumler, who's scheduled to come before the committee in July. Audio recordings and internal memos obtained by the New York Times reveal a reputational management firm was hired in 2024 to downplay her public association with Epstein. Eric, your reaction to that, what message does that send to survivors that she hired this firm to help with her own reputation?
I mean, unfortunately for the survivors, that is certainly not shocking. Again, I've said many times, Jeffrey Epstein is the only criminal I've ever seen to get special treatment beyond the grave, and it flows out to his associates. Anyone who seems to have been involved with Jeffrey Epstein seems to be facing a separate tier of justice and a separate tier of insight than the rest of the population. It is not surprising at all for the survivors that someone like that has hired a PR team. I mean, it seems like the United States government has been a PR team for the associates of Jeffrey Epstein, whether known or unknown. So none of this is shocking. It's just another frustrating and sort of debilitating, piece of information in this long, long line of travesties of injustice, travesties of social injustice, and just protection for the wealthy, protection for those who associated with or facilitated Jeffrey Epstein.
Thank you so much, Eric Fidali. Lisa, please stay with us. We have some breaking news now in the We have some breaking news now in the case against Luigi Mangione, the judge making a key decision about evidence in the state case against the man accused of gunning down a healthcare CEO on a busy Manhattan street. And Lisa Rubin is here with us. Walk us through this ruling, Lisa.
Well, Anna, in this ruling today, the judge, Gregory Caro, who will try Luigi Mangione in state court in September, has decided that key pieces of evidence can stay in the trial, notably the gun that he was carrying that day and a notebook that he was carrying in which many details about his plan and the ways in which he had sort of grown alienated from society were discovered. There are certain pieces of evidence that were in his backpack that were taken from him while he was at a McDonald's in Altoona, Pennsylvania, not yet in custody, that the judge says has to be suppressed. They include the loaded magazine, for example, and some other things like his passport and his wallet. But if I'm prosecutors, the things that most closely tie Luigi Mangione to the crime itself and his motivations for accomplishing that crime are the gun and the notebook. And so I walk away today from this decision feeling pretty good about my chances at trial, assuming that the jury doesn't buy one of Luigi Mangione's defenses, which is about his mental health. We still don't know to what extent Luigi Mangione intends to put on a defense saying that he is essentially criminally insane and can't be held.
To underscore, the gun and the notebook inside that backpack are admissible now as evidence.
Yes, as well as certain of his statements and most of the statements that he made to law enforcement that day.
Lisa Rubin, thank you for bringing us that breaking news. Up next, President Trump is expected to convene his national security team in the Situation Room tomorrow. What could be on the table when it comes to the war with Iran? Plus, high gas prices putting new pressure on charities. How Meals on Wheels is trying to keep the wheels moving amid the pressure. The clock is ticking. President Trump issuing that warning to Iran on social media. And here's the broader statement, quote, for Iran, the clock is ticking and they better get moving fast or there won't be anything left of them. Those comments come following a call between President Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu yesterday. And as the president is reportedly set to meet with his senior national security team tomorrow in the Situation Room to address his next steps in Iran, according to two U.S. officials who spoke with Axios. Let's bring in MS NOW senior national security reporter David Rode and former Arab-Israeli negotiator Aaron David Miller. He's a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. David, the president says the clock is ticking. Is that going to be viewed as a true threat or just bluster from Iran?
It's probably going to be viewed as bluster by Iran, but I think the meeting tomorrow is serious, and so much time has gone by with no sign of Iran backing down that it's getting to the point where the president needs to carry out some kind of military action to make his threat seem credible. And just over the weekend, in a sign of how emboldened Iran is, 3 Iranian drones were fired at a nuclear plant in the United Arab Emirates. One hit a power plant just outside of that nuclear facility. No radiation leaked or anything like that, but Emirati officials were furious, said it was a violation of the ceasefire and a violation of international law. Again, no radiation leaked, but that just shows how emboldened Iran is right now.
Well, Iran sending that message, not in words, but in actual force. Aaron, I want you to take a listen to one of Trump's biggest allies on Capitol Hill. Here's Senator Lindsey Graham's thoughts on the state of this war.
So you're saying it sounds like you do support more military action at this point. Do you think that's something that will happen? Do you think it could happen in days, weeks, months?
I think the status quo is hurting us all. The longer the strait is closed, the more we try to pursue a deal that never happens, the stronger Iran gets. So my analysis is there's nothing to suggest that the people in charge now are any different in terms of the regime's goal to terrorize the world, destroy Israel, come after us. So what do you do next? You weaken them further.
Aaron, do you agree? And at what point does the president have to make a decision on what to do next?
I mean, time's a critical factor here, Anna. And, to quote Hemingway, for whom the bell tolls, right now, I don't think it's really tolling for either side. Donald Trump appears willing to wait and to consider military escalation, either against the remaining target set, which would be, again, ballistic missile inventories and missile launchers, as well as perhaps whatever defenses the Iranians have deployed along the literal of the straits. That's one option. Escalation against civilian infrastructure, at least dual use interpretation. That would be desalination plants, power grids, bridges. That opens charges, of course, to war crimes. So that's one alternative. The other is negotiation. And frankly, right now, we don't have what we, I think, require to create a pathway out of this, and that is a hurting stalemate. There's a shared sense of urgency where both sides essentially feel that they need an alternative. And that opens the door to a negotiation. It's just, I don't think we've reached that point. I think the Iranians are prepared to wait. They think, they may be delusional, maybe not, that they're winning. And it is interesting that Lindsey Graham focused on the one visible manifestation of who in the end is going to be judged to have won or lost this war, and that is the Straits. No one's going to pay attention to complicated formula on uranium enrichment, moratorium, all that. Very important, but it ain't happening now. It is the Straits that will determine, I think, in the end, who gets in the won column and who gets in the lost column. And right now, it does not look good for the Trump administration and for the United States or the international economy.
David, you mentioned the strikes against the UAE. That happening, even though there's supposedly a ceasefire in place and both sides maintaining that's still the case. Explain that.
So it's again a way, I think, for Iran to sort of show its defiance and its power. And it's interesting because Senator Graham was mentioning attacking infrastructure inside Iran, power plants, things like that. Iran has said the first thing they will then do is attack infrastructure across the Gulf, in Saudi Arabia, in Kuwait, in the United Arab Emirates, refineries, power plants, desalination plants. Many of the huge cities there with millions of people require those desalination plants to have drinking water. And if you attack and destroy those refineries, those ports, those natural gas facilities, those pipelines, that is months and months of an energy crisis, not just weeks of an energy crisis.
Aaron, the Strait of Hormuz, Tehran's nuclear program, these are the key sticking points. But do you think Iranian leaders actually want to strike a deal?
I think, yeah, I think they're hurting. I think the longer the blockade continues, 90% of their imports are seaborne. They're cut off from oil revenue. I think they probably have more capacity to last several more months, maybe even longer. The problem is the deal. We keep talking about the deal. The problem is it's not something that can be done on the back of a cocktail napkin or on a cell phone. It's going to involve long and complicated negotiations, particularly if it's on the nuclear issue. You're going to have to get the International Atomic Energy Agency involved for monitoring and verification. I think the problem here on is that the Iranians want the problem of the blockade and the Straits and an end to the war. They want assurances on all of that, recognition of some Iranian leverage on the Straits before they're prepared to get into what will be very long negotiations on the issue of the nuclear side. So I think both on substance and sequence, Anna, I think the gaps are still as wide as the Grand Canyon between the Trump administration and this Iranian regime.
We'll see what comes of this meeting that's supposed to happen tomorrow. Aaron, David Miller, David Rode, I appreciate you both. Thank you. Up next, economic cratering. New poll numbers show Americans' growing frustration with President Trump over high gas prices and the cost of living. We'll talk to Professor Justin Wolfers about the economic pincher Americans are finding themselves in. Plus, off the rails, a train strike in America's largest city is creating commuting chaos. How it could go from bad to worse.
مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على الحبيب الذي أجاءنا هدى يا رب بالنور أكرم مهجتي واغفر ذنوبي وهون كربتي أنت الرجاء إذا ضاقت بنا الدنيا وبذكرك العالي تحيا روحنا. الله يا مولانا أنت الرحيم وأنت هادينا. الله يا رحمن بنورك اجعل قلوبنا إيمان. صلوا على طه الرسول محمد خير البرية والنور المؤيد من بالصلاة عليه نال راحة والقلب من أنواره يتجدد. يا ربنا اجعلنا على درب الهدى واختم بالخيرات أعمارنا مدى. مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على الحبيب المصطفى أحمد.